Have you ever gone onto a site like ArtStation and just thought,
Wizardry, the dark arts, space magic.
you know what? I agree. I'm in the same boat. If anything, anyone who's way better than anybody at anything should be systematically taken out for making us feel as bad as we do. But, unfortunately, the law prevents us from taking such action. So I say, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. In this series, I'm going to be taking you through my workflow on how I take a piece from concept to inspiration all the way to the final rendered piece. And hopefully, this gives you some ideas on how you can create your own artworks. How do we even start? Well, we need an idea. I find a lot of the time though, when I sit down at my computer, my brain goes completely blank. So what I do is that every now and then, when an idea does pop into my brain, I write it down. So that means when I sit down at my computer, I have a handy little list of things that I can start off with. But if you're like, hey, I'm here and I ain't got no list, that's fine. You can try using a random idea generator. You can find tons of them online, and sometimes really restricting yourself can make you more creative within those boundaries. Sometimes too much choice can paralyze you. Once I've decided on something to focus on, I start to gather reference. I just go online and start trawling through image boards and different places where I know I can find cool imagery. Mostly Google Images, but once I have some images that I like, I can copy and paste them into a program called PureRef. If you've never used PureRef, then this needs to be the next thing you install. It's stupidly easy to use. All you gotta do is go online, find an image you like, copy, and then paste it in. You can resize them any way you want and in any orientation, and zoom in from any distance. And the best part, if you're a cheapskate, it's 100% free. I swear I'll donate at some point. I recommend trying to get as a diverse set of images as possible. You want different things from different angles with different objects in them in order to give you as much room to be creative within the theme of what you're making. Now that we've got our images, the first thing we got to do is jump right into Windows Explorer. Trust me, this is important. Setting up a good folder structure for your projects will really help you in the long run. What I've done is actually create this folder that I've called default, or DEF, and then inside it I have a basic folder structure. So every time I create a new project, all I gotta do is copy that default folder and then give it a new name. And then I've got the folder structure set up right away. Okay, now that I've sent my viewer attention off a cliff because I talked about file management, let's actually jump into Blender. So just in case it wasn't clear, this video is going to be more focusing on my workflow rather than a step-by-step tutorial. This piece in total took about 5 to 6 hours, and that would just be too much to cover in one video. So I started off with, you guessed it, a cube, and I'm just using simple extrusion and scale techniques in order to create the basic shape of my food stall. I used this photo here as my main reference, just so I had a sort of cohesive thing to build off. Here, I'm merging vertices together from a cube in order to create this angled roof. Then I extruded it across and then copied it and then just bridged those two together to create the full roof. Now I'm just using some more stretched cubes in order to create the flaps that sit on top of the food stall. I suppose that's what they use to close it up for the night. And then I need the food stall to be sitting on these boxes, so I just created this cube, got rid of the bottom, cut some holes, and then used the solidify modifier in order to give it some thickness. I then placed these boxes underneath, and I made sure to add some asymmetry to them to make it feel a bit more organic. You don't want things to be perfectly symmetrical, especially in their placement, because that's just not how the world works. I then duplicated the top of this roof piece that I made, and then I added some edge loops in, and the idea here is to create sort of the edges that you need necessary to pull up a kind of tent in order to make this corrugated roof feel. You can see here, this is me pulling up all those faces that I've chosen. Now that I've got that in the state that I want it, I then just scaled it out to the side a bit so I have a bit more of an overhanging roof. The next thing I wanted to create is these embellishments that you see on the side. And the way that I did that is just by creating a cylinder, deleting all of the faces until I'm left with a half cylinder. So you can see me doing that here. And then I extruded out the sides, made them straight by scaling to 0. And then I used the array modifier to repeat this object along one of the axes. So you can see here, I'm immediately creating the look that I'm going for here. And then I just merged those together to create a single object. And now I'm free to place that in my scene. One more thing, I need to create the angled version of this, so I just created one and then duplicated it, bridge between them, and then just did a little bit of poly modeling to create this little middle piece that you see here. So now we have the outside of the food stall. So now I can focus on the inside. I'm going to create the sink first, or sort of the back metal plating that you see in some of these stalls. Just again, a simple cube, basic extrusion. You can see I'm scaling in this face and then just extruding down to create the sink. It's super basic modeling stuff, but you can do a lot with it. Some simple cubes to create the shelves. You see I'm duplicating it. Don't worry about creating tons of objects as well. It doesn't matter if you create lots and lots of different objects, especially for hard surface modeling. As long as there's a sharp join in real life, it's okay to have a model sort of shoved into another model. That's not a big deal. So now I have some shelving that I can put some items on. So I'm gonna start creating some of those items now. So the first one I want to create is a pot. So just created a cylinder, extrude in the top and extrude down in order to create the inside of the pot. And again, just what I said before, it's okay to put objects into other objects as long as there's a sharp join. So I just created these handles and then joined the whole thing together. And now I have this pot that I can set dress with. Now that you've done some of the legwork in this scene by creating these overall shapes and getting the composition right and getting the overall look and feel right, you can have a lot of fun with just creating little objects and things and just set dressing with them, placing them on different shelves, different angles. You can have some of them spilt, some of them broken. The more variety, the better to creating a more interesting looking scene. And for all these objects like the tray, the cup, bowls, whatever, all you gotta do is grab a cylinder or a cube and then extrude them from the top to create the concave look. So now I wanted to create a fan, so I just grabbed a sphere and added a wireframe modifier for the cage, then a cylinder with a bevel to create the middle part, and then just some planes that I poly modeled for the fan. I don't know what they're called, the prop arms. And then I just placed this fan up in the corner. It ended up not actually being seen in the final render, but I thought I'd show you how I made it anyway. Now, this is a shop after all, so I thought I'd make some receipts. All I did was I grabbed a plane and then added some subdivisions to it. And once I had enough subdivisions, I could then use the proportional selection tool to pull up some of those vertices to create some wrinkles and folds. And then I just placed that on my scene, just duplicating it a few times. And I made sure to use proportional editing to mess with each receipt so it wouldn't have the exact same wrinkles. Here I'm using a Bezier curve to create the rope that holds these big wooden pieces. I don't know what they're called, but big wooden pieces down. So just used a Bezier curve with the extrusion on it to make that thicker. Then I just duplicated them around where I needed them. Now I went about creating a plate, which is just a cylinder that I've extruded on. So you see I'm making the bottom smaller, then extruding from the top and just bringing it down so the plate has sort of the dip in the middle of it. And now I can stack these up and place them in my scene. I would encourage you to look at your reference not only for the modeling of your objects, but also the placement of them as well. This will add a lot of realism to your scene. Here I added some chopsticks, which are just cubes that have been stretched out. And then I tried simulating a plane to create sort of a tea towel, but it ended up just looking kind of flat. I then used a cube to create some signage on the front, making sure to extrude in a little square there to create like an outer wooden rim. I can later on go and use different materials on this, so I have an outer wooden rim and then a sign on the front. I'll go through that in a later video. Here I created some thermoses just using cylinders that I extruded in a little lip into and made the top a little bit smaller, but you hardly end up seeing these, so I ended up not focusing on them. For the bottles in the scene, again, cylinders are great, just extruded out the top, then added some bevels to sort of smooth out the curves of these edges. And then I was able to take this bottle, duplicate it a few times, and then use vertex editing in order to create some variations on that bottle. I then moved on to a slightly strange object, which is this electric element. And the way I went about creating this is just by using a Bezier curve that I extruded around until I had all of the concentric circles. But then silly old me didn't realize that I was actually moving them in Z space, so they were all wonky like this. But then I just scaled them by Z on 0, and that flattened them out nicely. I could then take this and then use the extrusion on the curve like I did for the ropes in order to create these concentric rings. And then I just modeled some other objects to fill out the rest of this element. If you wanted to know how I created that circle right there, I'm using the Loop Cuts tool, which is a free add-on which is already built into Blender. You just have to enable it. I then deleted the rest of the plane and then placed it with my element there. I was then able to put this into my scene and place one of the pots on top of it. And that's it. That's all the objects I created for this scene, and it ends up looking quite complex once you're finished with all of that. Now, this part of the process is a little bit boring, but very important. I organized my scene. I grabbed all the objects and started chucking them into collections. First of all, sort of smaller collections like cups, pots, whatever, and then larger collections like kitchen items or the outer shape. And this just makes it a whole lot easier to deal with when texturing and rendering, because when you're texturing, you want to be able to jump through and texture items of the same category very quickly. And that's much harder if you have to go through cube number 1,000,005 in order to find the one that you're looking for. Now, that concludes the first video of this small little series. It's going to be 3 videos. The second one will take you through the texturing and shading of the scene. And then the last video will take you through how I finish off the piece of art by adding in a camera, adding in some lighting, and also the final comping on the shot. If you like what I do here, please consider subscribing. If you get confused at any point or you really just want some clarification, please leave a comment. I'm always looking out to answer questions and I'm happy to help. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you guys later.